All right, good afternoon, everybody. This is a session on going from good to great, advanced strategies for compliance automation in ONESOURCE. You have two presenters with you from KPMG. My name is Nate Patterson. I'm a senior manager in our tax ignition practice. I've been with KPMG for just about 15 years. I have a particular strength in compliance and state specific tax technology and tools, and really I focus on compliance integration and automation. I've worked with clients across a broad spectrum of industries and profiles, including Fortune 15, Fortune 20 companies, all the way to startups, private equity, and family-owned businesses. I have degrees in accounting and economics and a master's degree in tax accounting from the University of Washington in Seattle, and I'm a licensed CPA in Washington and California. With me today, we have Keith Sheehan.
Good afternoon, everyone. Glad you could attend. My name is Keith Sheehan. I've been with KPMG for roughly 20 years. I've had many different roles throughout my career, one of which is internal tax software development, which our internal compliance teams use throughout the nation. I've worked with many clients on tax process improvement and implementing tax software to support those new processes put in place. And I am currently in charge of leading our tax compliance data strategy, working with our national teams as well as our individual local offices to implement a data strategy for all our tax compliance engagements. And I have a bachelor's degree in accounting from St. Francis College in Brooklyn, New York.
All right. Just a couple of notes on logistics and CPE information. First, the session has been pre-recorded. However, your presenters are participating in the session live to answer your questions using the Q&A panel. To verify your attendance and qualify you for credit, please ensure you acknowledge all pop-up alerts. And in addition, please be sure to complete the session survey to provide us with valuable feedback. We do read that and look at it very closely to adjust both our content and our approach for our future conversations. CPE credits for attending the session live will be added to your CPE certificate that will be emailed out to you following the conference. The recording of the session will also be available after Synergy, but that recording will not qualify for CPE credit. Okay. So for objectives, upon completion, our goal is for you to be able to decide when and where newer functionality such as ONESOURCE work papers or data connection might be appropriate, determine where APIs, and we'll explain a little bit more about what those are, may be an appropriate component of your compliance architecture, and finally determine where Alteryx might be able to be incorporated throughout your direct tax lifecycle to standardize and improve your use of data throughout the process. And Keith, if you want to touch on the agenda. Keith, you're on mute.
I apologize. Thank you for letting me know, Nate. We're going to talk about the current state of automation that's available to you right now. We're going to discuss solutions that you might already be using. And if you are, that's great. If you're not, hopefully you'll find some really easy entry points into the automation world and take those and continue to move along your journey. Next, we'll move on to a higher degree of automation. We'll talk about some of the drivers behind the need to automate. We'll talk about the variety of solutions, and we'll take a look at the wide array of types of automation that are available out in the marketplace. And then finally, we'll talk about some topics of consideration to get you started on your path to automation, whatever degree that may take you. Whatever balance of that tool set you find appropriate will get you on your way there.
All right. Okay. All right. To Keith's point, walking through, the integration and automation tools that are available at this point. Really, let's start with our discussion around core automation. And conceptually, these are items that are already available to anyone in this conversation that is using the compliance products offered by Thomson Reuters. These are items and capabilities that have been around for a longer period of time. And so there's a couple of considerations there. One, most people have been exposed to them in some way or fashion, whether it's in their current process or potentially in a different role, maybe. But also this functionality is mature and it's well established. And so we oftentimes start with this for those reasons. And the first of those is going to be your batch import and export capabilities into and out of ONESOURCE Income Tax. These are going to be things like trial balance information, tax adjustment information, tax reclasses, M2 detail for your federal return. For your international filings, it would be data like E&P and historical E&P reclasses, kind of those data points and process steps that tend to be relatively complex but able to be standardized. And so, we oftentimes start with a question of, are you handling this information on a company by company basis, or are you taking advantage of your batch capabilities? So ground level kind of expectations there. Very naturally paired with that is looking at your use of native OIT data structures. And so this is going to be things like you're setting up your charts for your federal and your international compliance needs to control, both your data as it comes in, as well as return presentation and calculation within the tax accounting system. So oftentimes, where we might start a conversation, especially for a client that maybe only has a couple of entities but has historically not really taken advantage of charts or the tax accounting system, they've kind of used the organizer as their point of entry. A lot of times we will suggest, hey, can we take a step back and maybe look at whether or not we could set up, charts to allow you to use the kind of the basic data structure within OIT, and then also use the default reporting out of the tax accounting system. One other area of core automation here is functionality called diff and cat, or oftentimes just diff files. This is an import methodology that has been around for quite some time, and it bypasses that tax accounting system and that chart structure that we just referenced. It is something that most people are familiar with, and at a bare minimum have been exposed to it at some point or another. And to give you an example, in 2018, there were some complementary diff-cat files that Thomson provided around some of the new tax reform reporting forms like the 8990 and related. And so that's an example of an import template. And so we bring that up because it is one area where we have historically seen attempts, and oftentimes successful, by our clients and our teams within KPMG to use some automation and kind of solve pain points. And so it is also an area that is going to be changing. And so for anybody who has not heard, DiffCat will be sunsetted here in the near future. And so for many of our clients, this is going to be really a good time to re-examine automation and the use of data throughout the compliance process, and to see if maybe one of these other capabilities that we're about to discuss could be used in lieu of the diff and cat functionality. Kind of working our way across that spectrum of automation is really going from that core to incremental automation. This is oftentimes where we see the Excel toolbars being brought into play by clients, and this is really two key toolbars. One is the data import Excel add-in. This has been around again also for quite some time, by Thomson, and something that we do see a lot of clients using. And again, in a lot of cases for a solution architecture, this is the first question we ask: is could the data import Excel add-in be incorporated, because it is going to be around, for the near future, and it is a relatively low effort way to automate the push of information to OIT. Paired with that is usually a discussion around ONESOURCE work papers. This is a newer toolbar, also Excel-based, provided by Thomson Reuters. This has been out for about 4 years. It started out with ONESOURCE tax provision, and then about 2 years ago, Thomson opened this up to work with ONESOURCE Income Tax. Notably, this allows push and pull of information from OIT, and the list of forms that you can push and pull is steadily growing. And so oftentimes we see a lot of interest and a relatively low effort way to incorporate some automation around the push and pull of information. And then as we kind of go again further along that spectrum and we want to see increased automation, we see a discussion around the Alteryx connectors and data connection. So we'll take each one of those in turn. The Alteryx connectors are toolbars that sit within Alteryx, and we can touch on Alteryx conceptually for those of you who are newer to it. But those would sit within Alteryx natively and allow you to actually integrate the push and pull of information directly into workflows in your process. And so again, it's kind of that one step further, and really opens up the possibilities of what is capable with true automation, setting up a single workflow, a series of workflows, and allowing that really that seamless access to the ONESOURCE database for an individual user, or a client's kind of well-defined process. In addition, we see an interest in data connection. This is also called tax return import and export. And this is another example of technology and functionality that has actually been around for some time for those of you using the Firm Edition Thomson products like Go Systems.
Hey Nate, if some of our participants were considering some of these functionalities and were on the fence, is there a benefit to any one of those? For example, the Excel add-in and work papers, how do those stack up to data connection, and as far as what is possible and what you're able to import, and what's what would be the scope of what you can do with each of those? Is there any benefit or upside or downside to any of those solutions?
Sure, absolutely. So let's start with the Excel add-in, and actually I'm using old shorthand, the data import Excel add-in. So that is, again, a baseline tool that has been around for some time, very stable, relatively easy to integrate. That will push certain core compliance information into OIT. So for your federal process, this would be your trial balance and your tax adjustments, as well as your M2 white paper detail and your M3 white paper detail. So very, very handy and powerful for those well-defined and normally well-supported data structures. So that'll push to the tax accounting system, and then there are other forms in the organizer that you can use that the same toolbar to push directly to. So, for example, you could push your 4562 and your 4797 for fixed assets. There are other supported forms as well with the Excel add-in that we often see an interest in. I would say ONESOURCE work papers is something where I usually see either a paired solution. So a lot of times we'll kind of start with the data import add-in, incorporate that, and then we'll kind of pair that with ONESOURCE work papers to take it to the next level. And so we'll either push additional data, or depending on what we can pull out with ONESOURCE work papers for that particular part of the process, we'll kind of pull that information out. What we're seeing around data connection, Keith, is First of all, data connection will push and pull directly from the organizer. It does not push or pull from the tax accounting system. So one of the decision points that we usually have to work through when we're looking at developing a solution architecture for one of our clients is we'll want to see to what extent they're using those OIT data structures that we referred to in the charts and TAS, because that will help inform where we focus our time. If the use of the charts and the tax accounting system is already in place and well supported, a lot of times we find they're already using the data import add-in, and we can really focus our time on let's talk about the complex high volume forms that you're dealing with, and that's an area where maybe work papers or data connection might be a better choice. But oftentimes, and I think Keith, where I usually summarize this sort of overview is to say, there's usually not going to be a magic bullet. It's going to be a combination of enabling technologies. And so a lot of times what we'll see is a process diagram that incorporates two or three or potentially more of the items mentioned on here as part of addressing pain points in the client's process. And I think that does touch on one other thing. The enabling technology or technologies that we talk about and that we use really depend on the pain points. And so a lot of times we'll see people go into a discussion thinking that they want to use APIs or they want to use Alteryx connectors, and really the pain points that they're experiencing, might be better addressed through something like data connection, or even just using the charts. So, Keith, does that address the question?
Yep, absolutely. Just wanted to level set and kind of highlight some of the benefits and trade-offs of some of those combinations, but I think you touched on it perfectly. You saying, essentially use all of those in combination with the right balance, and you can find a good technology that supports your tax process.
Yeah.
You mentioned APIs. Is that next on our list of things to talk about here?
It is. So we kind of started talking about some of the increased automation. Really, probably the most or the greatest automation potential that we see is something called APIs or application program interface. Really what this is conceptually is the ability to set up a third-party program and a process support. So oftentimes clients where there might be IT support to build something into a solution architecture around direct access to Thomson's database. And so this is something that would be independent of Alteryx, although Alteryx does use the same kind of pathway to access information in OIT, but it would allow you to set up very advanced and automated pushes and pulls within ONESOURCE. And so to give you maybe one example of how I've seen APIs used, one of my clients set up APIs very quickly after it was introduced, and they actually set up APIs to run a full reconsolidation every night. And so every night, 2 a.m. their time, they had an API call that went out, and it actually ran a full reconsolidation regularly throughout their process. And so that actually touches on a really important concept as we walk through this conversation, which is, as we talk about what's possible and what's supportable, we also want to talk about how these integrate with the needs of your process and the needs of your department. We can design amazing, automated, powerful solutions, but for maybe a tax department that is a little bit smaller tax department, maybe that's simply just not necessary, and that's it's nice, but it's overkill. Or maybe we have a well-defined, well-supported tax department, but they don't necessarily have the capability at the moment to support a large number of Alteryx workflows, for example, or to support an API-enabled process. And so those are examples of situations where there is fantastic capability of available through ONESOURCE, but it may just not be the right fit. And so,
Hey Nate, just another quick question for you. You highlighted the ability to run a consolidation using the APIs. Is that the limit of that functionality? Because that essentially replaces a manual process of having to go through the interface, actually kick off the consolidation, and let it run, and you end up having to wait while it's running. And in comparison to the other tools that we've talked about, are there other import functionality that's layered into the APIs, or are the APIs just a replacement for user interface interactions?
so the API access gives you the ability to import a number of different things, and so kind of working our way back up this list of topics. APIs give you the ability to interact and update some of those OIT native data structures. So it gives you the ability to work with the charts, specifically the federal charts at this point in time in OIT, and so you can actually set up and modify charts as well as the related information, return information as it comes in. And so we have the ability to both control the configuration, meaning entities and your federal charts, as well as the return information, so your trial balances and your adjustments, as it comes into the system. And so this is one area where I see, potentially complementary functionality. And so a client may already have some of this set up, but we may want to use those APIs to query the system and kind of compare that against maybe a data warehouse that the client maintains. And so it kind of gives you that ability. And then in addition to that, the push and pull of return information. And so right now the focus has really been on the federal data in the process, but we expect that, population of possibilities to expand, pretty dramatically, including foreign information and state-related information. So I'm curious, Keith, does that kind of jive with what you've observed as well?
It absolutely does. It gives you, if you were willing to invest in that type of approach to your process, I think it could deliver a huge amount of benefit because it gives you some of the best of all the combination of the tools above on the slide, and it wraps it into one common technology that you can leverage going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. I think this is actually a really good time for our first polling question. How many different imports are you currently sending into ONESOURCE Income Tax? 1 to 5, 6 to 10, 11 to 20, or 20 plus? We'll give you a second to choose your answer. So couple of things as we're kind of looking at this. One goal that we discuss when we're talking about automation should be to reduce the number of imports. And so, if you think through the up and downstream effect of that the number of imports has on your process, each time an import takes place, the data, first needs to be converted to the import format. It needs to be validated correctly. And then, each import represents a change in data, which then requires additional review. And so, one concept that we try to introduce is this idea that in the long run, the more you can automate, the less time that you spend on data wrangling and additional reviews. So, just something to think about. All right. Keith, shall I segue to you?
Sounds good, Nate. Thanks. Next, we're going to talk about a little bit about taking automation to the next level, and we're going to focus on some reasons behind wanting to automate. And I'm going to put a slide on the screen just give you a second to take that in. You'll notice that the result of some of these errors that are included in spreadsheets are quite significant. Now, I do know that spreadsheets are very near and dear to all of our hearts, and it's been part of our industry for a very long time. But when we think about automation, we're not trying to necessarily eliminate spreadsheets from the process. We're just trying to eliminate the time spent working inside of them. There are many inadvertent errors within spreadsheets that happen that could result in significant results. And most times, we all review our work, but as deadlines approach and pressure starts to build on meeting those deadlines, we start working at a pace where errors could become more prominent. And in a rush to meet that deadline, we can very easily oversee something inside of a spreadsheet that we might not have caught, especially if something's coming through a formula or it's linked to another workbook that was updated without your knowledge. These are all things that can happen right under our noses without really being very stringent and on top of every single change that's happening. So just some thought around why we need real automation. And then on our next slide, we have another whole handful of issues that you come across without automation built into your process. Low scalability. If you're maintaining spreadsheets or separate files, imagine having to update those for a change in tax law. You'd have to go through every single work paper that you have to apply that change. Similar changes for rollover. Every year when you roll over your work papers, is that an automated process, or are you doing that file by file, or even worse, tab by tab within your spreadsheets? Again, we talked about error prone. Having a process without automation can be very high in error if there's a lot of hands-on keys. Again, as Nate mentioned earlier, you talk about a lot of people entering data, and that can increase your review time. Imagine being able to cut your review time down because you have a higher confidence in the quality of data that's coming through and understanding where it's coming from and understanding what has changed and not who has touched it time and time again throughout that process. We talk about documentation and audit trail. We brought up Alteryx as a possible solution with using Thompson connectors, but even using Alteryx inside of your own process, you build your own audit trail. Alteryx is a non-destructive software. You can pull in information, make as many changes to it as you would like, do calculations, filter data, create additional output files, all without impacting the original source data. So if you make a mistake or you find that there's a significant error, the error occurred within your Alteryx workflow and is not related to someone making a change within your source data. I think that's a huge value.
It's interesting.
That solution.
No, Keith, I just wanted to throw in there. I completely agree with that. And I would also throw out what's interesting to me about working for many of our clients for the first time with Alteryx is it also highlights, to your point about documentation, it highlights both some of the risk with the data manipulation that's been taking place historically, and it also oftentimes really highlights it to senior members of management in a way that helps them understand why certain tasks might take so long. And what I find interesting about Alteryx is in particular as an enabling technology is it also oftentimes it kind of provokes other conversations. And so, if you think about apportionment data, a lot of times, once somebody looks at all the manipulation that really has to take place just to get raw apportionment data validated in a usable format, it oftentimes prompts a discussion around, is this really what we want the tax department doing? Is that something IT should be doing? Is that something maybe a service provider could be doing? So it's very interesting to me because it highlights both the risk behind that process, but it also helps, I think, bring some comprehension, around the current state of things, around many process, sub processes in the direct tax lifecycle.
Yep, absolutely. And I know we're a little off topic. We've kind of gone all in on Alteryx here on this slide, but another thing that's really fantastic about Alteryx as a supplement to your tax process is that it's it can be highly integrated with things like SharePoint and other systems. So you can pull information straight from SharePoint sites if that's something you're using within your organization. It can also be used, and I've used this functionality of it on a large national project here at KPMG. You could use it as a communication mechanism. Alteryx has the ability to send out emails to specific groups, to individuals on a large scale. We had people that were editing and typing up emails at hundreds of emails that we needed to get out each week, and we reduced that person's time commitment on that. We basically eliminated it because Alteryx just read information that we were feeding into it, and it took upon filtering out, creating all the emails, and sending them out without someone ever having to touch it. And we put that on a schedule, and it just continued to run without any issues. And it really helped our communication aspect of our project. So,
I think
which kind of leads us into our knowledge sharing and remote work. When you can automate things, and right now we're all working in a very different environment than we're used to. So improving communications and taking the time out of repetitive tasks that you're doing, especially remotely, can really improve the process overall. And as far as knowledge sharing goes, I've seen people work with Excel spreadsheets that when we ask some of our clients or teams, oh, well, why is this being done in this spreadsheet? One of the most common responses that we get is, oh, I don't know. I wasn't the one who developed this. We've been using it for years, and the person who put it together is gone. And that's a scary concept, because you're just relying on something that isn't fully understood. So with automation, you want to make sure when you do automate a process, you document it. You make sure you understand where things are coming from, what the feed is, and how it's being processed, and then what the output of that process is. And it makes for a much more scalable and shareable solution for your organization.
Yeah.
I know we talked a whole bunch about Alteryx on this slide, Nate, but I think we're going to transition to a new slide that we're going to talk about a whole other bunch of technology tools. So I'll pass it back over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, we did start to talk about Alteryx. And I think, that is something that is probably on a lot of people's minds. If they aren't already working with Alteryx, they've at least heard of it, very much a popular topic. But I did want to take a step back, having walked through some examples of ONESOURCE specific enabling technologies and types of automation, and really just some considerations around risks with the lack of automation. I wanted to take a step back and maybe just touch on the importance of one, understanding the world of possibilities at a broader level. And so when we talk about automation and data solutions, it necessarily prompts a lot of different topics. And I think we won't necessarily go point by point in here, but there's just so many different ways to approach a conversation around working with tax data and looking at your direct tax life cycle. And it is oftentimes very challenging to understand really where to start. And so, usually what we suggest is, it's important to understand topically kind of what each one of these capabilities can do. But really, part of what we do is we use process automation discussions and process definition discussions to help our clients really kind of come up with a compliance automation strategy. One of the areas where we see a lot of frustration sometimes is when people kind of hear about a possible approach and they kind of go down the path without ever really taking a step back to really understand what they want their process to be, probably more importantly actually what their process actually is, and talking to the people who are doing the work, understanding what their pain points are as they understand them, and then really coming up with a roadmap. And so you'll notice in this graphic, and there's a lot of different capabilities and concepts, but really the core of this is understanding and defining your process and coming up with an approach to refine it over time. And so with that, I'm going to use this as a segue for us to talk about kind of types of automation. And actually, before I move away from this, I did want to touch on one item here. You'll notice that diff-cat down here has a little asterisk next to it, and that is because it has been around for a long time. It is being sunset. So we wanted to throw it in here because most people are familiar with it or at least have been exposed to it. But that is going to be sunset here soon. So with that overview, Keith, would it make sense maybe to touch on each of the types of automation really quick, and then I can walk through some specific examples?
I think that'd be great. I think we have a slide that lays all that out for us.
Yeah. Okay. Are you seeing the types of automation slide?
I am.
Okay. All right. Okay, so as we talk through each one of these types of automation, and we'll touch on each one kind of in turn, but I did want to bring home one important concept, and that is really the importance as we talk about each kind of automation, and really the importance of starting with a discussion around your process and a discussion around your choice of leverage model and kind of what you envision both of those being. And so if you really starting with that current state, within KPMG we use a phrase called Lean Six Sigma. Many of you are familiar with concepts like it, but it's essentially, again, defining your process in a way that everybody can understand and articulate, and then really coming to an agreement within your department as well as your key stakeholders as to what you want that to be, and really what you want that to be over a really well-defined timeline. And so oftentimes what we see is a near term, 1 to 3 months to kind of give you something in the short term to work towards, but then also understanding in the context of maybe the current compliance season, and year 2 to year 3, and then maybe year 5 and plus, really to help you focus. And that's not even just focusing your resources and kind of your technology skill set, but even just your attention on a daily basis. What do you really want to focus on? But not only that, what are your KPIs and what are you judged by, and really what are your stakeholders key requirements, and what are the capabilities? How do they really fit into this? And I think that feeds into that second overarching point, which is understanding, your mix of service providers, internal and external, and understanding kind of which way you're inclined to go, and maybe that is co-sourcing with a firm, or it's insourcing, or maybe it's a mix and match depending on the needs of your department and of the overall finance organization. Keith, does that make sense? Is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I don't think I'd add anything to that. I think you summarized it really well. And as we go through these, I think this will start to make a lot of sense as to what tools you can use to support each of these different types of automation within your tax process.
All right. All right. So the first type of automation is data automation. This is what most people are probably going to be familiar with intuitively within the tax function. And this is really working with data in its raw form and manipulating that into a format that can be analyzed and that can be ingested, at various points throughout the process, including import and export out of ONESOURCE, but also used with other software enabling tools, um, as well as other parts of the compliance analysis. Again, regardless of kind of which functional area. So there's a couple that really come to mind here. Again, this list is not really exhaustive, but it's the ones we see most often. And so really where we would see the ONESOURCE capabilities applying. One is data connection. We also see ONESOURCE work papers, APIs, and Alteryx, and really oftentimes we see a blend of these capabilities being brought to bear. And for many tax departments, this is the most significant lift that they can articulate, readily, and that really comes out with a process discussion. The one thing I want to highlight about data connection in particular is that it is one very new functionality, but it's also very powerful functionality. And so I highlight that because we oftentimes see a lot of interest in it. But in the hands of someone who maybe is newer to it, there is some risk there behind maybe unintended consequences with the data in the organizer in OIT. And so we just suggest a little bit of caution when evaluating that, and certainly encourage you to reach out, to a partner, whether it's Thompson or a firm, to talk about that and how it might fit in. Really just to make sure that you're getting the results that you want and there aren't any unintended results. So the next type of automation is source system automation. This is one that we see a lot of clients have at least looked at a point in time. This is looking at your source systems and really working with the data providers and the owners of those systems to provide data in the cleanest and most easily ingestible format without that middle step, that data automation step. And so a lot of times what we see here is using a tax sensitized ERP approach and kind of cleaning that up. This is one where we see APIs potentially being used to great effect, but this is still very new. And so we have an asterisk to note that this is more of an emerging topic. And then very naturally, we see Alteryx plugging in here as well, with the ability to push and pull directly from various systems, again, depending on the needs of your overarching process. Next on our journey is the concept of surface automation. This is what most people would be familiar with in terms of logging into ONESOURCE and maybe clicking on buttons within the interface, running reports, that sort of thing. And so this is an area where we see bots or robotic process automation being used most naturally and very powerfully. And so I would just note here that we've seen a lot of interest in this area. And a lot of times where we see questions is maybe not on what can it do, but what are the right use cases. And so a lot of times with estimates and extensions, we see a lot of interest because those are high volume and relatively straightforward tasks. And so just something to think about. And I'm sure, again, as RPA capabilities will evolve, as Thompson's capabilities and integration evolve, I certainly see a lot more use cases here. And the use cases here could also shift over time as well, depending on how API and Alteryx capabilities change over time as well. This could kind of shift for certain processes, if direct access becomes more prominent. So we then kind of get to process automation. This is one that ties in with that process definition and refinement step or Lean Six Sigma in our parlance. Workflow management is one that we see a great deal of interest in from a governance standpoint, and really just kind of controlling and understanding who's doing what are the appropriate review steps and sign-offs, etc. A couple of other enabling technologies. SharePoint is a very common discussion point here as well to help with data management and organization as well as workflow tracking. Again, very oftentimes a complementary solution. Bots and RPA, or robotic process automation, are another common point here, as well as visualizations and dashboards, and really giving decision makers and process owners insight into how a process is working, its relative efficiency, and really comparing that back against those KPIs that we mentioned. Do you understand what's happening at each step? And do you have enough definition and control to be able to make changes where you think that's warranted? All right. Very much a hot topic in other parts of the finance world, especially, is cognitive automation, and this would include things like natural language processing and cloud computing. And so I would just say these are both very nascent technologies and something we've seen also a lot of interest in, and we've seen some capabilities around contract analysis and as well as around supporting the infrastructure behind our various compliance process architectures. So very much a hot area. Keith, I'm not sure if you have any thoughts on that really quick before we get to end-to-end automation.
Yeah, I mean, cognitive and cloud computing are such big buzzwords now. Using those in your process can certainly help drive a lot of efficiency. There's plenty of things you can do in combination. And when you think about cloud computing, it's not just one technology. It's quite a lot of technology under the hood. When you look at what Microsoft Azure is doing with their marketplace, there's such a variety of things that you can use as far as file storage, data processing, response to stakeholders or customers. You can build a lot of automation within cloud computing. There's so much possibility there. I think it's a great new world that the industry is looking at, and it's exciting to see where it's heading.
Yeah. I think. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm just going to jump to the last slide. I think we're running just a bit short on time here, so I want to leave room for the last poll and closing remarks.
Absolutely. The only thing I would throw out here, by the way, for the end-to-end piece is kind of tying with that cognitive automation. There's a lot of possibility here. We see, in our view, APIs are very much part of that, as well as Alteryx. And again, with the proper process overview and understanding, a lot of possibility here for true end-to-end automation. But again, I would say probably very aspirational for most at this point. So very much of interest. So just a high-level overview for this last slide, and just to reiterate the importance of really that process understanding, and again, kind of giving you just kind of a high-level snapshot of where we see each of these enabling solutions coming into play. Okay, last polling question. What issues are you trying to address with automation? Greater efficiency, version control or error prevention, improving scalability, or lack of reporting functionality? And I suppose we probably should rephrase this slightly as what is the most pressing issue that you're trying to address? All right, just a couple more seconds. All right. All right. So, as we kind of come to the end of our conversation today, one of our goals is to help you, one, understand what's possible, give you some insight as to what we're seeing as both near term, very achievable, results and kind of some good directions to look into, but also giving you a framework to kind of enable you along that journey. And so, from my perspective, and Keith, please chime in here as well. I think the first and foremost is making sure you establish short and long-term goals. And it's important to know, of course, where you want to be in several years, but it's also important to understand, what you want to accomplish in the short term. And vice versa. A lot of times we see people take a very tactical approach to automation, and what we find is that over time they struggle with that longer term vision. And so,
I think one of the most important items on this slide is to be adaptive to change, Nate.
yeah,
Technology and the tax law are changing at rates that we haven't seen in ever practically, and you can put a solution in place on Monday and almost have it be out of date by Friday. It's obviously an exaggeration, but be open to change and be understanding that things could change down the road, and as you experiment, don't be afraid to fail. When you put something in place initially, it might not work 100% of the way, but it's certainly going to show you a better path forward, because you're going to see what didn't work, and you're going to find a way that you'll tell yourselves, this is so much better this way. Maybe we didn't think of it the right way initially. So don't be afraid to experiment, be open to change, and those are big topics for me.
yeah. I think the only other, parting thought I think I would throw out here is, as you establish that plan and that vision for your tax function, really kind of making sure, in addition to the goals and that you set, making sure that your path is supportable, within your organization, really making sure that those align with the software capabilities. And I would say here, to Keith's comment about experimentation, really just keeping an open mind. And just because something isn't possible today, it doesn't mean it won't be tomorrow. The world, the capabilities with OneSource specifically, but also in the tax function more broadly, are evolving very, very quickly. So it really is an exciting time to be focusing in this area, and very optimistic and hopeful about what's to come. So, would just say, I think with that, thank you very much for attending, and your time and your attention. Please remember to complete your evaluation. We really do appreciate your feedback. Thank you all so much. Have a good night.
Thank you.